The list of famous people who get confused for other famous people. Number 1 is Zooey Deschanel and Katy Perry. Number 2 is definitely Theo James and James Franco. Number 48th, probably Thomas-Alexandre Dumas and Alexander Dumas. Valerie Park Brown wrote this article titled Napoleon and General Dumas and states its purpose very clearly and plainly in the very beginning. The purpose of this article is to treat Napoleon and General Dumas in an effort to ascertain not only their actual relationship, but to discover and expose the motives behind the former's treatment of the latter. The article is only 12 pages long, and the thesis is stated throughout the entirety of it and also in the very beginning sentence with the purpose. But overall, it's just to determine the true nature of Napoleon and Dumas' relationship over the many years and the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte was actually born as Napoleon Buonaparte in the Italian tradition of the island of Corsica. He wasn't going to have a full French name. And it's funny that he wanted to have a more French name and adopted the French surname, because now French people, they just speak English with the accent all the time. They don't actually speak French anymore. Napoleon's history is well documented. He went on to do all the stuff that he's famous for doing, or infamous, I guess, especially if you're Egyptian. But Dumas, Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, had already been around before Napoleon. Now, Dumas Sr. had risen from the lowest rung of the military ladder to the highest positions in the French army long before Napoleon was even known in military circles. Thomas Alexander was born under a plantation owner, and he was born to a slave mother, making him both aristocratic and othered at the same time. Though the othering was mostly visual, he wasn't actually enslaved. He was treated as an aristocratic facet of the plantation. He moved freely about it, spoke to other soldiers, learned of the military. He grew rapidly, he towered over his contemporaries even at 18, standing at 5'9" and then later 6 feet. Dumas' time in the military was not wasted. He moved up the ranks with alacrity and efficiency. He first joined the King's Dragoons, becoming corporal and then second lieutenant, and then a day after becoming second lieutenant became first lieutenant. He became a brigadier 1 month after, and then 3 months after that became lieutenant colonel. Next year in July, he became Brigadier General, and then General of Division of the Army, and then in 5 days, General Commander-in-Chief. In only 20 months, he went from being a lowly private to the General-in-Chief of the military. Of course, this was notable and gave him notoriety, but it was all before Napoleon had come about. And being famous and important before Napoleon is almost a bad thing, considering how important Napoleon would become. Any achievements would be absolutely dwarfed, ironically, considering everything, by Napoleon's own achievements. Dumas was at some point charged for having destroyed a guillotine, which was done so to have firewood for his troops, so it was sort of a noble cause. He was acquitted, resigned, and then was called upon once more when riots broke out in France. He arrived too late while Napoleon cleaned up, and then he was ordered to Italy to assist Napoleon. He was greeted by Napoleon, who undoubtedly knew of him, and Napoleon's wife, Josephine. To assist Napoleon, Dumas was immediately stationed in Mantua, and he recovered assets that had been swallowed by a Venetian spy. After that, Dumas took part in the battle at La Fèvre in 1797, which is just around the end of Louis XVI's reign, if I recall correctly. During that battle, another man, Berthier, accused Dumas of only looking at the battle instead of fighting, and Napoleon took it as a perfect moment to diminish Dumas' command. He sent Dumas out to Tyrol, where he took command of the cavalry, which all in all was quite the demotion for the guy. It was here at Tyrol that Dumas whipped the cavalry into shape and miraculously secured a victory at the Bridge of Clausen, which is actually a really insane story. There's an essay about it that I really enjoyed, and I'll probably link it either in the description or I'll put like a thumbnail if I can figure out how to edit that in. Now, what's written in the article says that Dumas, after the Battle of Clausen, returns to Napoleon and met him in a warm embrace. It was later during the Egyptian front of the Napoleonic Wars that tensions between Bonaparte and Dumas heightened. As soldiers began to question their purpose in the presence of Egypt, Napoleon said that Dumas' 5 foot 10 inches could not save him from being shot within 2 hours, should Napoleon ask for it. It's a stark contrast in comparison to the jovial and friendly exchange between Napoleon and Dumas in Toulon, where they discuss the prospect of godfatherhood between the two of them. The article continues to detail the Egyptian front, in which Dumas found millions worth of treasure, and instead of keeping it to himself or the soldiers, informed Napoleon about it. Dumas' ship to return home to France after his business on the Egyptian front never made it. Instead, he was imprisoned. This is where the Count of Monte Cristo gets its story from. So, thank you, other Dumas. The article caps off with the various pleas of Dumas and his wife to receive their pensions and arrears to no avail. And Napoleon, when asked about Dumas, said simply, "Never speak to me of that man." Now, from what I've learned about the Enlightenment and how they were all about pursuing a sort of utopic state of being, it makes sense that after the economic crises between the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, especially right after Louis XVI, Napoleon's sort of emperor complex where he does everything for France and he's like divine and whatnot, it sort of makes sense. I don't know where the religious aspects come in from. I guess that's maybe sort of a backdrop for Napoleon's idea that he was supposed to conquer the world. But the utopic society led by like a despot, I guess it makes sense. Despite the cyclical nature of French social and economic upheaval, this one is particularly important simply because Napoleon comes in afterward, and that sort of changes the entire playing field. But if we're going to talk about Napoleon, I only hope that we can talk about Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, because I think he's cooler. And I know he's taller, so there's that.